Hey everyone, and welcome. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. As we gather here in remembrance and just thinking about the particular events, and we reflect on the events of 9/11 and how it impacted our nation and our culture. This moment in history serves as a reminder not just of the past, but also to, for things to consider as the kind of leadership we need in times of crisis. So I'm going to show you a video here in a second, and it takes us back to the day that changed our world, September 11th, 2001. As the plane struck the Twin Towers, the reality of a global crisis unfolded before our very eyes. But it also taught us lessons about resilience, leadership, and the need to act decisively when faced with uncertainty. So I'm going to bring it up real quick. Hold on, let me stop that. So, as all of us saw this, I mean, we can think back and and remember remember a time when what we were doing at that point in at 9/11. As you noticed in the video, this was pre the first plane, and the fireman, the person taking the video, I don't know what was going on with the fireman there, but they heard the sounds of the plane and the cameras started looking up, and that's when they saw the first plane hit the tower. At that moment, there was an unexpected crisis. Something happened. They didn't know what the change was going to be, but it was definitely immediate and was going to be long lasting. So, what we want to talk to you today about is what type of leadership does it take to lead in a crisis like this, or maybe a lesser crisis? And I think the first step in doing so, we first of all have to define what a crisis is. So, a crisis is characterized by at least five things. Number one, there's unpredictability. It often strikes suddenly and without warning. Okay. Now, some may go back and say, we should have saw this coming, but we didn't. Those firemen on the ground didn't see it coming. They didn't know what was about to happen, but they were going to react, and they were going to react bravely. It also is characterized by a threat to operation. It disrupts our daily business, leading to potential or financial or operational breakdowns. We're going along with the flow, and all of a sudden something happens. It totally trajectory changes, and we move into an entirely new direction. It may cause reputational damage. It can harm our organization's public image. It certainly damaged America's image at first, and a trust among stakeholders. Now, later on, that trust among Americans solidified, but the crisis also separated us immediately. And it's characterized by time sensitivity. There's quick decision making is essential, from the first responders on the ground to the folks that were their businesses, their lives, everything. Immediately, and during this situation, we had to ground all air flight. That's a quick decision that impacted a large community. And finally, the complexity. Crises frequently involve multiple issues and stakeholders, making solutions even more challenging because we have to consider more than just what's right in front of us. So today, what we want to talk about is, what do leaders need, or what do you need as a leader in order to lead through a crisis? And we're going to talk about three areas. These principles are: number one, consistency and reliability; number two, emotional intelligence and empathy. How does that play a role? And finally, we'll talk about competence and preparedness to get you ready to be the leader you need to be during a crisis. So with me today, I have two very distinguished gentlemen that are going to help me go through all of this. I have Jeremy J.T. Thompson. Jeremy is a retired Marine Corps officer who served proudly for a number of years and was also helped direct in the Marine War College the leadership curriculum, how to become a leader. What does it take to be a leader in the Marine Corps? And welcome, Jeremy. And then we also have Dr. Brett Mers. Brett is a retired Air Force intelligence officer and a former professor at the Air Force Academy, where he taught leadership to young cadets striving to be a great leader in the Air Force. So we're going to start with Jeremy. I'll let him come on with his presentation. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Good afternoon, everyone. We'll start with just a quick scenario. And in late spring of 2024, the leadership of major universities across the United States faced the challenge of campus protests, acts of civil disobedience, and even defacing of property and physical violence. These acts have been attributed to polarized views, political views related to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, continuing concerns regarding social justice and policing, and many other local and global issues. So university leadership faced challenges trying to balance principles of free speech, student activism, scheduled events and traditions, operations, and campus safety and security. In response, one university restricted campus access. They augmented security with local law enforcement individuals. So you had police, in larger numbers on the university campus. And then they went so far as to cancel the main graduation ceremony and the valedictorian's speech. So the question is, was this a crisis? It's not on the magnitude of 9/11, but from the perspective of the leadership of these universities, was this a crisis? So did it impact the university's stability, reputation, or functioning? Was the situation unpredictable, time sensitive, and complex? Did it disrupt their operations or risk damaging the university's reputation? I would say the answer is probably yes to the first and to the second. The decision to cancel key elements of the commencement stemmed from concerns over protests and potential safety threats on campus. The atmosphere around the university had become polarized. Both internal and external voices and actors were amplifying the situation. So not only were you dealing with students, you were dealing with external individuals who were coming onto campus, seeing that as an opportunity to try to address whatever concerns or agendas that they had. And so the sudden cancellation of these long-standing traditions, such as the main commencement ceremony, the valedictorian speech, and I would say the response to that in the visible absence of senior leadership contributed to a sense of betrayal amongst the students and their families. Many of these students had already missed significant milestones due to the COVID-19 pandemic and felt robbed of another critical moment. So how does this particular scenario relate to the first of our key practices, which are consistency and reliability? So let's explore these concepts a little more deeply. So what helps a leader to be consistent in a time of crisis? I offer two essential practices that I believe contribute to consistency. The first is trust, and the second is equanimity. So how do we define trust? Well, you can see on the screen, trust is a willingness to be vulnerable. And that's something that I think people don't have as much of an appreciation for, is the sense of vulnerability in followers necessary in relation to the actions of others, their leaders, based on expectations that they will act in a reliable, competent, and ethically sound manner. And this is where we get to the idea of integrity. Trust is an essential component of that leader-follower relationship. And so how do you build trust? Integrity is an essential component of leadership in supporting trust. And one way that I've seen integrity described is, at its root, the word integrity means integration. It's a connection of things. And in this case, it means the integration of your words and your actions. In the military, we often talk about the idea of the video, what people see, matching the audio, what is being said and what is being espoused. So integrity is ensuring that what you do, the decisions that you make, the actions that you take, do they match what you said and you promised and you encouraged and you said were the standards of behavior? From an organizational standpoint, those decisions and actions should be not aligned necessarily only with your personal values, but the professional ethics and values of the organization. So when you're in a crisis and you're considering, how do we respond? What decisions should we make? At the forefront of that decision making should be, what does our organization value? What do we stand for? Because it's in a crisis when those values become the most important and most relevant. The second point is equanimity. So what is equanimity and why is it important for consistency? Well, equanimity, as it's defined here, is mental calmness, maintaining your composure, your evenness of temper, but especially in difficult situations. In the words of Rudyard Kipling, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, that is equanimity. So in a crisis, what do you have? You have uncertainty. It's a situation that people probably haven't been confronted with. And so when there's uncertainty, a lot of times followers don't really know what to think or how to act. And in many cases, these individuals take cues from their leadership. So if you are calm, it allows you to reduce the impact of stress on you. And by reducing that stress, it gives you the ability to endure what tends to be a long, drawn out situation. Crises typically are not sprints. They tend to be marathons. They seem, because they're urgent, that this thing is going to happen quick. And yes, you do need to take decisive action. But a lot of times, these things are drawn out, and recognizing that it's going to take a long time to get through these requires endurance. And that calmness and that equanimity can promote your ability to endure. It also produces clarity of thought. So when you're faced with a dynamic, changing situation that's complex by definition, you have to maintain perspective and allow you to keep in alignment with those organizational values and priorities. If you don't remain calm and composed, it's hard to think clearly and to be able to take in all of those complex variables. So let's move on to the second component of this, which is reliability. In the end, what is reliability? It's, do you show up? Are you there when things go bad? Can I count on you? And in this case, visibility is essential because, again, people want to know in a time of crisis that something is being done. They want a sense of stability. And so how do you produce that? How do you contribute to that as a leader? Well, through visibility. And that visibility has two components: physical presence and informational presence. I heard it once said that you can pretend to care, but you can't pretend to be there. There's something about being present. You must be present to win. So when you are there, when you show up, when you're in that place during a crisis, you're visible. People can see you. Say, I'm here. I care. I'm doing something about this. And that is a very powerful message to send to people in a time of uncertainty and crisis. It also, when you're physically present, gives you the ability to model behavior. Again, when people don't know how to act, they don't know how to respond, they're going to take cues from you. Well, how can they take cues from you if you're not physically present? So being physically present allows you to demonstrate that you are acting with integrity, allows you to demonstrate that you are maintaining that calmness. The second component, informational, when things are uncertain, there's this huge appetite for information amongst all stakeholders. We're talking about internal and external. They want to know what's going on, what's happening. What does this mean? What are we doing? That uncertainty just eats away at people. So informationally being visible and present means you have the opportunity to shape those perceptions. One of the key functions of a leader, I believe, is interpreting reality, interpreting what's going on for your organization. You can only do that if you're present physically and informationally, if you're communicating, you're sharing those things. So frequent, transparent communication to all of your stakeholders, internal and external. You need to be proactive with that. And that's a key component of maintaining visibility that helps you appear reliable. So, returning back to the university protest crisis, what can we learn? How can we apply this? Regarding trust, equanimity, and visibility, what did the school administrations do well? And what perhaps could they have improved upon? What can we learn from them? Well, on the positive side, the administration took decisive action to prioritize campus security by canceling the main ceremony. A controversial decision, but something that they felt was essential for maintaining that priority, which was campus security. So they aligned with their legal and ethical responsibilities to protect students and staff. That was based on a thorough risk assessment and considering the increased potential for disruption and violence. And despite canceling the main ceremony, the leadership did allow smaller school-specific events to proceed, which provided some level of normalcy and allowed them to celebrate. That decision helped mitigate some of the disappointment that we had talked about. On the other side, what things could they have done better? Well, I would say that the absence of senior leaders at key ceremonies and events drew some widespread criticism. Some people were just not present. They didn't show up. Leadership should have been more visibly engaged with students. Their failure to address graduates or communicate a public message on the day of commencement was seen as a failure of providing emotional support and acknowledgement. Again, it's that presence informationally they did not do a good job of. The administration struggled to communicate clearly, to set appropriate expectations with the student body. So the decision to cancel events seemed abrupt, and the lack of transparency around the risks and the rationale for canceling the ceremony really created some frustration for students and their family members. So again, the decision to cancel the valedictorian speech, though it was justified in the eyes of the administration, was poorly handled from a public relations standpoint. They did not specifically explain the decision or provide alternative ways for the valedictorian who had earned that opportunity to be honored and give that opportunity to address the student body. So it added to the perception of mismanagement and kind of a lack of alignment with the university's stated values of inclusion, open communication, and accountability. Those three values are specifically called out in the university's set of core values. And when you don't act in a crisis in accordance with them, again, that can be seen as poor leadership. So specifically, what can you do as a leader right now to prepare for consistent and reliable leadership in a crisis? Well, going back to those three essential components. One, build trust. Focus on that. Be deliberate. Do it daily. So how do you do that? By making and keeping commitments. Say, I'm going to do this, and then actually do it. Communicate openly and honestly. So being transparent, making sure that you're clarifying perceptions, going back to the role of a leader as defining reality or interpreting reality. Your constant communication helps shape those perspectives of individuals. And of course, acting with integrity, making sure that your words and your actions match, but especially when you think nobody's paying attention, when the spotlight is off, because those sorts of things are the things that come back to bite people when they find out that people are not acting with integrity when people are not watching. And then organizationally, making sure that the decisions you make for the group aligns with the values and ethics of that organization. The second thing, grow a capacity for equanimity. How do you do that? Well, exercise self-awareness and schedule routine activities for self-reflection. Put that in your day-to-day schedule, your weekly schedule. Think about it. Block time for reflecting on whether or not you have been equitable and equanimous in your comport. Make it a priority to keep calm and to maintain perspective in emotionally charged situations. You know, there's always things that are going to surprise you. They're going to catch you off guard. They're going to trigger you. Be self-aware. Try to find ways to keep yourself calm and maintain perspective in those situations. And the last thing is practice physical equanimity through mindfulness and meditation. Those are ways that you can actually grow the skill of recentering and balancing and coming back to a state of calmness and perspective. The last thing is promote visibility. So be visible by engaging with your stakeholders. Again, those internal stakeholders, your employees, and your external stakeholders, those people who have interest and equity in your organization. Cultivate relationships. Do it actively. Communicate openly and frequently. Walk around. Be present. Do it so much that it feels normal to you and to the people that are a part of your organization. It should be comfortable. Like when the boss shows up, if the tone of conversations and the content of conversations is changing abruptly, it's a pretty good indication that people are not comfortable with your presence and not used to you being visible. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about the critical skills of emotional intelligence and equanimity.
All right, great, JT. Appreciate that. I had a question as far as visibility and presence. What's the frequency or suggested frequency of that presence when it comes to being visible?
Yeah, I think that's part of the balancing act that you're constantly going to be doing. You're going to be gathering those atmospherics when you interact with people. You know, if you are so present and so frequent, then all of a sudden you become, you know, one of the guys or one of the people, that might be a little too much, right? But again, if when you show up, like, you know, like music's playing and the record scratches, you know, and everything stops, then maybe that's an indication that you're not being engaged enough.
Gotcha.
So I think it's those judgment calls and those atmospherics that you sense, you know, and you've also got, you know, some of, you know, we call them your trusted telescopes, you know, the people who exist down in those organizations. Talk to them. Hey, what kind of feedback are you getting? Hey, am I, you know, Am I being around enough? Do people understand me? Do they know what I'm thinking? And are they comfortable with me being around? Or hey, is this, am I down there too much? Am I getting in your way? Am I disrupting your ability to lead your group? Those are two ways that I think you can probably gauge whether or not you're spending too much or not enough time.
Awesome. Appreciate that. All right. So we're going to go in to talk about that emotional intelligence and empathy, the characteristics that we need as leaders. So hopefully I tried this yesterday. It worked. For some reason, I don't know if the sound may be coming through. If not, we can move on. That's no issue. But let me start it and see what happens here.
We're not hearing the sound, Larry.
Okay. No issue. So I challenge anybody. I don't know what the deal is right now with Zoom, why it's not piping through, but that's okay. I challenge anybody to go out to YouTube and find Brene Brown's explanation of empathy, and it's very impactful. Not to mention that Brene Brown is probably my celebrity crush, but we won't get too deep into that. So, what is emotional intelligence? We have to define it first of all, because we hear it all the time. Well, you need more EI. Okay, well, thanks. What is that, and how do I get some? So, and how does that apply to being a leader? So, emotional intelligence is the ability to understand and manage your own emotions and those of others. So, I think we all struggle with this, especially as new leaders, understanding what our emotions, what role they play in leadership. Okay. And Goleman's EI framework really says, I think it says it best. That's why I included this in here. First of all, there's self-awareness, the ability to recognize and understand your moods, your emotions, your drives, and how they impact others. A lot of times we judge ourselves based upon our intent, but we judge others on their behavior. Well, our behavior drives our intent, and that's the perception of our intent. So if we don't understand who we are, then we can't add value to others, because I don't know where I begin. Okay. So social awareness is the key to building emotional intelligence. Now, how do you get that? You can, there's assessments out there that help, but meditation, and I know JT mentioned this as well, just daily reflection, becoming familiar with who you are and your moods, your triggers, right? What triggers you. Social awareness, the ability to understand the emotional makeup of other people. And when we're talking about a crisis, this is extremely important, because everybody is impacted differently and at different levels of impact. If we as leaders don't understand that, then it's very difficult to lead them and to make decisions that we know are going to impact them. Thirdly is the self-management piece. This is the piece where we're controlling our impulses and our moods based upon whatever triggers. Now, I live in Northern Virginia, around the Washington, D.C. area. And if you've ever been here or you're familiar with it, or you know people that are here, you may hear us talk about the Beltway. All right. Traffic is horrendous. So a trigger for me is definitely stupid people on the highway, those triggers. Okay. But these triggers can come into play in a crisis, because we go into survival mode, fight or flight, and it impacts our decision-making process if we are unable to manage those impulses and moods that come about. And finally, the relationship management. That's the proficiency in managing relationships and building networks. And in a crisis, these relationships are so important, because we can't manage it and lead through a crisis alone. We have to be able to rely on others. But if we lack emotional intelligence, it's going to impact our ability to have relationships because we don't see the impact of our own emotions on others, and we don't see the impact of our decisions on others. So that's why that is emotional intelligence. Okay. So let's define empathy. Now, you may be confused of empathy versus sympathy. What's the difference? Empathy is the ability to understand and share the feeling of another, putting yourself in their shoes. Okay. Sympathy is feeling compassion or sorrow for another situation without necessarily understanding it or experiencing it yourself. So I added this in here, and if we were able to see the video, Brene Brown does it's a great video on kind of describing this. But sympathy would be if I come up and I see you in a hole, I'm going to go, "Oh, I'm so sorry you're in a hole. That must suck." All right. And a lot of times sympathy stops connection because you may be saying, "Yeah, I fell in the hole." Well, at least it's daylight and it's not raining. Okay. But trying to paint a silver lining around your situation, that's sympathy. And it often creates devalues the connection and breaks that connection. Empathy, on the other hand, is I see you in the hole and I come down with a ladder and I say, "I'm so sorry you're here. How can I help you?" And I listen to you. So let's put this into the context of a crisis. Okay. I'll give you a personal example of this. We all remember COVID. Okay. It impacted everybody in the world and it impacted everybody differently. At the time, I was still working for the federal government, and our director of the agency I worked for, and we had a worldwide mission for national security. And our director was a three-star general, General Bob Ashley. And I remember him coming on early, like JT was saying, he was visible early on. And he defined reality. He said, "I don't know what's coming. I don't know what's next, but I do know we're here together." And he'd show up every week and give that message. He's like, "We still have a mission to accomplish, but the main mission is that we take care of each other and you take care of yourself." And coming from a three-star general who was in charge of an agency that was responsible for a national security of, the security of our nation, that meant a lot. We no longer saw him as the boss, but we saw him as a leader who was going through this with us. He showed empathy and high emotion intelligence during the entire process, so much so that as COVID started to wane down and he retired, you could almost hear the vacuum of him leaving, because we definitely felt it as he was replaced by someone who did not necessarily have the EI and the empathy needed as a leader. So how do we apply this in a crisis? It's okay to have it, but what do we do with it? It's like having a tool that sits in a toolbox that is never used. Okay. Communication is number one. My little friend over here on the right side of the slide, what is he doing? Well, he's listening versus barking or talking. A lot of times as leaders, we come out in a crisis and we want to make sure that we're recognized as being in charge, where in reality, we really need to listen to understand, how is this crisis impacting you, my people, you, my organization, you, my stakeholders that surround us. So I need to spend more time listening versus talking. And there has to be some empathy in that listening, right? There's different levels of listening. I can hear what you're saying, but be thinking about, did I leave the iron on this morning? Or what do I need to do tomorrow? Okay. That's not the listening we're talking about. We're talking about active listening. In order to do that, there has to be some empathy. I can hear the words you're saying. What's the expression on your face? What is your body language telling me about how this is impacting you? As a leader, that's important because I'm going to have to make a decision at some point, and I need to consider that. So the communication during crisis, it's imperative that we utilize EI, or emotional intelligence, and empathy. So what about being decisive? Because as a leader, what's our main responsibility? We make decisions. Things have to get done. So how do I balance that with my empathy? So are we necessarily need to appear decisive? Absolutely. Because the last thing we need is a leader that seems to not know what he's doing or can't make a decision. So the appearance is important, but at the same time, there has to be a balance between making the decision and the empathy, understanding how my decisions are going to impact. Now, there's going to be certain crises and times during a crisis that will necessarily require us to make a decision that is going to impact in a negative manner. We get that. COVID, what did we do? We didn't have all the information, so our leaders shut everything down. That was a decisive move. Whether you agree with it or not, it was something that they'd felt on the information they had they needed to do at the time. Later on, decisions become, how did that decision impact everyone, and how do I balance future decisive or decision making utilizing empathy? So EI and empathy in a crisis is very important in our decision making and utilizing empathy, but there has to be a balance. Also, we have to apply this through people and environment, fostering that trust and loyalty. And this goes back to what JT was saying, building that foundation of trust. If I can't trust you, I'm not going to follow you. I'm not going to be loyal to you. And empathy and EI definitely feeds that ability to build a culture of trust in your organization. And it also results in a much higher morale. Okay. If I trust you, if I see you're empathetic and you're considering my position, I'm more likely to follow you. I'm going to be happy about following you, and I'm going to stay with you until the end of the crisis. So this is how we apply it. But how do I get it? How do I develop it? Is it something that's natural? We've all heard leaders are born. No, they're not. Well, they're born. We're all born, but we're not born to be a leader. It's a skill set. So is EI and empathy. It's something that can develop over time. Okay, first of all, begins self-awareness. We talked about this earlier. That regular self-reflection and mindfulness that helps you understand your own emotions and how they impact others. Okay, so that key component to developing EI and empathy begins with self-awareness. And then you have to practice it. In every exchange with any interaction with anybody, think about how you can listen more actively. Put yourself in their shoes and execute empathy, and seek to understand their feelings before offering solutions. Goes back to Covey's 7 Habits. Seek first to understand, then to be understood, because it also shows that you value the other person even more than you value yourself or your own needs. And continuous learning. All right. EI and empathy, this is a process. Okay. There's not an easy button. You don't go and get a prescription for EI and empathy, take a pill, and all of a sudden you're an empathetic leader. Okay. It requires practice on a regular basis. And let me share a secret with you. If you're a leader, your improvement and your growth never stops. Okay. You're never going to arrive at that level to where you don't need to grow anymore. So when it comes to developing the empathy and emotional intelligence, it's an ongoing process. But the value of this in a crisis is so urgent and so important. Okay, as we go through and we see in our nation today, and it's always divided during an election year. Okay, we all know, we all understand that. We all look at each other and go, where are we going from here? All we can do is take care of ourselves as a leader and become the leader we need to be, because a crisis will come again, whether it's global crisis, a organizational crisis, or even a personal crisis. And developing your emotional intelligence and empathy will give you the necessary foundation to lead through it. All right. I'm going to turn it over to Brett. Brett, I'm sorry, but our videos aren't working, so you get to go from the cuff and just not use the video. I'm sure you can do that, though, right?
How's that? Am I making noise now?
You're making noise, my friend.
All right, well, good. No, it's a very good thing. Just as a note, I on 9/11, the original 9/11, I was stationed overseas in Turkey. I was actually back on leave. I had taken we went and I took my mom to the doctor, and she was in the doctor's office, and I was in the waiting room with my then, I think, 9-month-old daughter in her stroller when, all the events happened. I watched it on the TV. A few days later was back downrange in Afghanistan, enjoying a lovely, all expenses paid vacation to Central Asia for a while. But this morning, I actually was able to spend 9/11 again with that same daughter, who's now 24, and a ICU nurse up in Denver. She came down for coffee, and so we had a little bit of remembrance time there, although she didn't remember the original one as much as I did, but you know how that goes. So, we're talking about change and leading through a crisis, and it's kind of what leadership is, isn't it? I mean, when everything's going cool, who needs a leader? So leadership sort of defines itself in crisis. And I define crisis in these ways. Number one, it's change. So a crisis is change. It's a simple alteration of the status quo. I can change the position of my hand. I can change the position of my mind. I can change anything you want. And that's a critical part of a crisis. It's change. It's unexpected. Doesn't mean it makes it a crisis, but all crises are usually unexpected, because if you were really ready for it, is it a crisis? I mean, my transmission goes out of my car. It's a crisis, right? Well, not necessarily. Not if I've prepared for it. If I bought the warranty, if I've got extra cash set aside, I simply run down to Joe's Auto Hobby Shop and pop a new one in. So a crisis is change, it's unexpected, and it's perceived in a negative fashion. It's perceived negative effect, sometimes emotionally and intellectually overwhelming. Somebody walks up and hands me $1 million. It's change in my life. It's definitely unexpected, but it's not negative. And if anybody's interested in doing that, I'll have my bank routing numbers after this presentation's over. So a crisis is change, it's unexpected, and it's an overwhelming negative event or nature. And we live in a sea of change. It's been my experience in life, the average human bear doesn't like change. And yet, change is the sea in which we live. There is no second of your existence that you haven't been in constant change. Change is a characteristic of life. It is a characteristic of every living system. It's the sea, it's water to the fish. It's the sea in which we swim. From the quarks to the spinning electrons to the galaxies, the universe pulsates in constant dynamic shifts and change. That's the nature of life. So why do we fear change often? I think it comes down to two things genetically. One is an overactive amygdala, and two is a good memory. Now, the amygdala is a part of your brain that's sort of the gatekeeper for all your sensory information, because when the crinkle in the leaves behind you doesn't turn out to be the squirrel that you're going to have for lunch, it turns out to be the tiger that's going to have you for lunch, you don't get to pass on your genes very well. So we developed this thing called the amygdala, which is a gatekeeper for danger, emotional significance, and primarily danger. And when we see a situation that is dangerous, we tend to remember it. That's a good thing because that keeps most of us alive, especially young, dumb, and idiots like we are. If we didn't have the amygdala, most of us wouldn't be around to be talking about it right now. But we also have a memory, and we tend to remember those things, and that produces sometimes a fear of the future. I had a colleague one time explain to me, as an example, water buffaloes. When the tigers come in and the danger comes in, the adult water buffaloes will make a circle with their horns out, their tails in, and they put the young in the middle of the circle. After the danger goes, then the tiger goes away, water buffaloes break the circle, go back to grazing like normal. He said humans do the same thing. A crisis comes, 9/11 happens, COVID comes. And what do? We rally the troops, we circle the wagons, and here we are. But we remember. And so we never break the pattern up. Should I be as a leader? How often should I show myself, if you want, a crisis situation? One of the guys, in fact, the first guy I worked for full-time in the Air Force, had his PhD. He was a colonel, had his PhD, not in space propulsion, but in theoretical space propulsion. We called him Dr. Warp Drive, and he was every bit that smart. But the cool thing about Neil was he was cool as a cucumber. And no matter how hot things got, Neil got cooler and cooler and more analytic. He was inspirational, really, to be around, if nothing else, for that. And sometimes he would say, you guys got it. You got this. You got it covered. All right, I'll be back in an hour. And he would go out and he would actually take a run and clear his head and come back and get right into it. And one of his colleagues, another colonel, called him on it once out in the hallway, and they didn't realize I was overhearing the conversation. And the other guy told Neil, he said, you shouldn't be gone in the middle of stuff like that. And Neil looked at him and said one of the most classic things on leadership I've ever heard. He said, there's never been a problem so bad in all the world that it can't survive the absence of one Air Force colonel for an hour. And I went, you're right. And that gave me a sense of calm that we can handle this. And that is ultimately your job as a leader, is to inspire and create a sense of confidence in your followers that they can accomplish that mission. So again, change is constant. In the 45 minutes you've sat here listening to us talk, you've traveled nearly 1,000 miles around the axis of the Earth. You've traveled about 67,000 miles around the sun. And then you've traveled in the solar system about 500,000 miles around the black hole in the center of the galaxy. We're constantly shifting, constantly changing, constantly moving. So how do we deal with this kind of thing? Sun Tzu said in very critical terms, if you know your enemy and know yourself, you will need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither your enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. So what does it come down to? Know yourself, know your enemy, know your environment. And we've talked about emotional intelligence and creativity and trust and empathy, and you have to know yourself. Socrates said, above all, know thyself, because like it or not, our particular set of coordinates in this universe is right behind our own eyes. So we have to begin to know ourselves before we can know anything else. You have to understand who you are and where you are before you can begin to know where you need to go. So know yourself, know your enemy, know the challenges in your own environment. In the military, we're big on planning. I planned everything. We didn't go outside to evaluate ambiguity. The process of the planning is the key. The plan is nothing, but planning is everything. The Air Force uses a mnemonic called the OODA loop. OODA, observe, orient, decide, and act. I observe a situation. I orient myself to the challenges. I make a decision on what I can do, on the options. I take that action. And then immediately I'm back to the beginning at the now new situation to observe again. Because why? Change is constant. Change is constant. Know yourself, know your enemy, know your challenges, know who's coming after you, if anybody, know your environment, which you operate in. I mean, you may have the best running truck in the world, but if you have to cross a river and there's no bridge, your truck's going to be worthless. So know the environment in which you operate. You look ahead. Do as best you can to educate yourself constantly. You know, this learning profile, like Larry was mentioned, you don't go take a course and you're yay verily blessed as an emotionally intelligent leader. No, it's a constant growth process. I hope to learn something new and make a new friend the day I die. And hopefully that's a while, but I'm still working on that as we go. So change, crisis is change. It's unexpected and it's overwhelming many times. Know how to deal with it. Knowledge is power. And as one poet put it very aptly, he said, there will be moments when you bloom fully and then wilt, only to bloom again. If we can learn anything from flowers, it is that resilience is born even when we feel like we're dying. Crisis is part of the cycle of life. Energy moves in a sine curve up and down. The leader knows that and communicates that to his or her subordinates to make sure whatever your mission is gets accomplished. Back to you, Larry.
All right. Thanks, Brett. I appreciate that. And like Brett says, it's not a matter of if a crisis is going to happen. It's just a matter of when. It's going to come. And if you're going to be prepared as a leader, then you need to continuously grow, continuously learn, continuously practice those characteristics that we've talked about today. And, you know, I'd be negligent in my responsibilities as a leader if I didn't offer you an opportunity to do that. This is not a sales pitch whatsoever, but one of the things that we do is we help build leaders. Okay. We help empower leaders with the strengths and the skill sets they need to lead in a crisis. If you want to learn more about how we do that, here's some information. You can send us an email at info@azimuthconsultingllc.com. Visit our website. Look at our events page. We've always got something coming up. I'm about to update that today. But the easiest way to do this is just to schedule a discovery call. We can have a conversation about what you need and how we can add value to you. Just use the QR code, and it'll take you to a calendar, and you can schedule a time with us. And I appreciate those that were able to log in and spend some time with us today in remembrance of the tragic event of 9/11, but understanding that crisis helped us as a nation become stronger and more resilient so that the next crisis won't take such a big hit and impact on us. And that works with our teams, our organizations, our families, our communities, you name it. As a leader, you have a responsibility to be the best leader you can and be prepared for anything that can happen, because people are going to be looking for you the minute that crisis hits. They're not going to look forward. They're going to turn and say, where is my leader? So I challenge you to think about this. Take some time to reflect today on and remember those that we lost during 9/11, but also what we gained as a nation, what we gained as a culture, and how we can do better tomorrow by getting better today. God bless, and thank you for joining us. And those that watch the replay, if you have any questions, please reach out to us. Take care.